married or in a committed relationship looking for real advice on having love and enriching your relationship? You are in the right place. Welcome to The Couples Expert with Stuart Fensterheim.
Hello, this is Stuart Fensterheim, the Couples Expert. I am excited to be coming again to you from my office here in Scottsdale, Arizona. It is a gorgeous day today. It's approximately 90 degrees. We talked about Arizona sometimes being sort of hot. Well, today is one of those days. It is the first of many hot days coming to you from Scottsdale because Arizona is sweltering this time of year. We begin our record highs. We're at a record high of 90 degrees, but I am here in my office. Some people ask me a lot, how do you handle all that heat there in Arizona? It's that I love my office, and my office is air conditioned. So we just spend a lot of time indoors, starting around this time of year till September, October. And then we are at a glorious 80 degrees when some of you back east and in other parts of the world are freezing. So I love living here, and I love bringing these podcasts to all of you to really help you have that emotionally connected relationship. And today is no different than any of the other days where I love bringing on guests on my podcast. And I met Lauren online. She is an associate marriage and family therapist in San Francisco, California. One of the reasons that I've decided to bring her on the show is that Lauren specializes in an area, and I've been hearing a lot from some of my clients who are struggling with chronic illness and the impact of chronic illness on the marital relationship. And Lauren was diagnosed a while back, I think in 2015, with relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis. And she found that although living with an autoimmune disease isn't easy, it actually has brought more joy and fulfillment to her life than before. And one of the things that I wanted to talk with her about is, how do you have an attitude that says the biggest difficulties in our lives is often an invitation to a deeper, richer, more conscious relationship with ourselves and with our partners? And one of the fun things for me is always when I bring on a podcaster on the show, and Lauren actually does have a podcast. It's This Is Not What I Ordered. And it's a weekly interview show about full-hearted living with chronic illness and health challenges. And I urge you to check her out as well, for those of you that love listening to podcasts. And I wanted to read to all of you a poem. My conversation with Lauren the other day was to really sort of do a little bit of a setup on what we're going to be talking about. And I was reflecting on a poem that really brought tears to my eyes the day that I was struggling with my daughter. Some of you may be aware, I have a daughter, Sarah, who's currently in her 20s, that was born with a very difficult GI problem. And she's had approximately 19 or 20 surgeries to this date. And she's really been just godsend to me, both in terms of the challenge that it brought to me personally, and also obviously to me in terms of my relationship with her and my relationship with people who have been in significant relationship, my ex-wife, for example. And I really struggled with helping her get through her early years, because when my ex was pregnant with Sarah, we originally thought she had a trisomy 13, which would be that she would pass away when she was very young, approximately 2 or 3 years old. There were actually physicians who said to us that we should abort the pregnancy. And what's very interesting about this story is that the situation was that the two of us, obviously me being in the medical field, and we're talking with the doctors, and doctors have a tendency sometimes to think they know it all. I don't know how many of you have doctors in your family, but I have brothers who are physicians and nephews who are physicians. So I know what I speak of, that sometimes doctors just don't really slow down and recognize some of the urgency that they are to diagnose. And they told us this, and then myself and my wife said, could we see some of the test results? And they said, well, we haven't run them yet. I said, don't you think it's a good idea to run them before you start telling us that this is what she has? But they said, oh, I know she has this. And it turned out she did not. She had something not as serious, but something serious. And she had a tracheoesophageal fistula, which meant that her esophagus stopped growing. And if we hadn't found out a bit prenatally, she would have drowned in her own saliva because her esophagus and her stomach and the lungs there was some mixed up stuff. And because we found out about it at 10 hours old, they ripped her away from us and they had her have major surgery at 9 hours old. And we left her in the ICU. And the story basically is that there was nothing harder for the two of us for many years of seeing our child go through this or seeing a loved one go through having chronic illnesses. So I want to read this poem called Welcome to Holland. And the concept of it is such an important topic for couples to have those dialogues and then speak with Lauren about how do you make your relationship feel so good when there's a lot of problems and a lot of pain and a lot of anguish that comes along with medical issues that are chronic. So here's the poem, and I'm going to read it, called Welcome to Holland. I'm often asked to describe the experience of raising a child with a disability, to try to help people who have not shared that unique experience to understand it, to imagine how it would feel. It's a little bit like this. When you're going to have a baby, it's like planning a fabulous vacation trip to Italy, to buy a bunch of guidebooks and make your wonderful plans. The Colosseum, the Michelangelo David, the gondolas in Venice. You may learn some handy phrases in Italian. It's all just so very exciting. After months of eager anticipation, the day finally arrives. You pack your bags and off you go. Several hours later, the plane lands. The stewardess comes in and says, "Welcome to Holland." Holland, you say? What do you mean Holland? I signed up for Italy. I'm supposed to be in Italy. All my life, I've dreamed of going to Italy. But there's been a change in flight plan. They've landed in Holland, and there you must stay. The important thing is, they haven't taken you to a horrible, disgusting, filthy place full of pestilence, famine, and disease. It's just a different place. So you must go out and buy new guidebooks, and you must learn a whole new language, and you will meet a whole new group of people you would never have met. It's just a different place. It's slower paced than Italy, less flashy than Italy. But after you've been there a while and you catch your breath, you look around, and you begin to notice something. Holland has windmills, and Holland has tulips. Holland even has Rembrandts. But everyone you know is busy coming and going from Italy, and they're all bragging about what a wonderful time they had there. And for the rest of your life, you will say, yes, that's where I was supposed to go. That's what I had planned. And the pain of that will never, ever, ever go away. Because the loss of that dream is a very, very significant loss. But if you spend your life mourning the fact that you didn't get to Italy, you may never be free to enjoy the very special, the very loving things about Holland. Lauren, welcome to the Couples Expert Podcast.
Thank you, Stuart. I've been really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, me too, just because it's interesting, because I used the example of my daughter in the introduction. And as I was recording it and reading that poem, I actually got somewhat emotional here, because I think poems is interesting because it really brings you to that emotional place. And I don't think there's anything more emotional than when you have someone who's really important to you and they have a struggle where you feel so helpless, and just the experience stays with you. So I've been very excited about doing this because I think it's such an important topic that I mean, when I search podcasts and things like that, I don't hear people talking about this.
Yeah, it's a really important topic, and it touches so many of us.
Right. So let's start with, because I'd like to introduce you to the audience a little bit more before we start the conversation, to talk a little bit about your journey. And if you could share a little bit about both your diagnosis and a bit about what led you to the mental health field. It's a crazy kind of field that we're all in, and a bit about your specialization and why you've chosen that one. I think it's probably pretty obvious why, but if you could share some of that.
Sure. Well, I became interested in being a therapist just as someone who's been a lifelong client of therapists, and I really believe in therapy, and found a book called Getting the Love You Want, which is by Harville Hendricks and Helen LaKelly Hunt, which is, I'm sure you're familiar with, imago relationship theory. And when I read that book, I realized that there were so many questions I had about why romantic partnership is tricky that were answered in that book. And there are great tools in there, and I started to practice them and realized that I just wanted more couples to have the tools to get through the hard spots. And that's what originally inspired me to become a therapist, is I wanted to be a couples therapist. Now, when I was in school, I was in the year of practicum training, which is when we spend our first year with clients while still students. And in the second month of my practicum, I woke up one morning with my right leg and foot skin deep numb. And it was very strange. And I thought I'd shake it off, but I didn't. And over time, the numbness increased and spread to my other leg and my torso. And it took quite a few months to get to a place where I could finally get this multiple sclerosis diagnosis. And I was finally diagnosed in that second month of my practicum. So that meant that I was getting used to being a person living with multiple sclerosis and getting used to being a therapist essentially at the same time.
Right. And I'm sure as that was going on, sort of all the thoughts of, can I even do what I want to do?
You know, I actually felt like I didn't have the thought that I couldn't do it. In fact, I think therapy is one of the best jobs for someone who is unsure of their health future, because it doesn't require nearly as much from the body as maybe the average career.
That's true.
So I think part of me felt glad that I this career, because I think anybody who's newly diagnosed can probably identify with future tripping and thinking about what's going to happen in my future?
Right.
Where's the crystal ball? So that was definitely part of it. But I did know that I knew that this would impact my work in the sense that I'd be able to gather my own personal experience and use it to enhance my ability to relate to clients.
We all struggle when we start out in the field, what our specialization is going to be. It sort of helps you with that guide.
Yeah. And it's funny because I didn't know what my relationship with the disease would be before I could open up and start working with clients, specifically with the intention of doing chronic illness work. But after the first couple of years, I said, I'm totally ready for this. I can't wait. So I just started writing articles and promoting that part of my business.
One of the things that often comes up with this issue is, if someone has this diagnosis and in a relationship and is, there's all these expectations of relationships, how do you sort of then balance this new diagnosis that someone may have? And how do you share that with a partner? And how do you deal with their expectations along with your own expectations?
It's such a big topic. And it's so important to, I think, for me, acknowledge that chronic illness and any kind of health diagnosis is one of many obstacles that couples face. And so just the same way that we would face another obstacle, as I imagine you and I would, which is to encourage dialogues and encourage couples to turn to one another and to be real with each other, to be real about what are my fears. I'm going to share something with you, and here's what I'm scared of. I'm scared you're going to reject me. I'm scared you're going to run away. Whatever the fears are that come up, but also to be willing to listen to the fears of your partner. Because the thing that I think can push couples apart is not talking. I don't think it's chronic illness that would push couples apart. And often we don't talk because we don't know how to talk about it. And so when it comes to revealing a diagnosis, I actually, I know I've talked to and been friends with so many people in the chronic illness community, everyone from the couple who, on their second date went to a doctor's appointment to a couple where, it took a few years before one of the partners was willing to even disclose the diagnosis to his wife. So it's really a range of approaches, and every couple finds what works for them. But there are a lot of fears that can come up for people, for sure.
And especially if someone's in a marriage and there's a commitment in that relationship already, the question comes up is, using your name of your podcast, it's not what I ordered. So often the struggle becomes, if I'm someone that's an active individual and part of my love for my partner is what we can share, and now we can't share that, how do I make sense of this? And how do I stay in that relationship? And I have both sides that says, here, I have this commitment. I love this person, but there's parts of me that I won't now be able to share that may be very important.
Yes.
And how do you balance that is so difficult, I think.
Well, one of the things that I think chronic illness does is it gets me in touch with what's deeply important to me, what my values are. And so when it comes to something that I, used to be able to do that I can't do now, often it's physical, it's important to kind of take stock of what exactly was it about that thing that spoke to me? Why did I love that thing so much? Looking at the value that it brought. So let's say, we enjoy going kayak. We have this team spirit. We're enjoying the sun and we love to be in the fresh open air and there's no rules and we're free. Well, how can you find other activities that allow you to tap into those very things?
Right. But in terms of that whole experience of being able to share some of your passions with your partner, you're speaking about sort of that person that now can't do those things. I'm thinking of it more from the perspective of a partner. And how do I then make sense out of this partnership that once was a big part of that partnership is about what these activities that we can share, and how do we then go from now not being able to share that to still making the relationship meaningful and significant?
Yeah. And I think anybody who has those questions is on the right track because that's where you turn to each other.
Right.
And I also think it's important for partners to be honest and open in a loving way about the loss that they feel. We need to value the feelings of both people. And so what may seem like it would tear a couple apart by saying, I actually miss doing these things with you and I feel great loss from it, could actually bring a couple together. Because if you can meet that with empathy and say, it makes sense that you feel that way. I feel that way too. Wow, we're actually kind of both in the same position in a way. And now I feel a little bit less alone. I know I feel way more human.
Right.
When somebody is honest with me.
I like to think of this very much like, in some ways, it may sort of bring forward the aging conversation. As you get older, there are things you can do and can't do. And I think part of the challenge for a lot of people, they get one-dimensional. They start saying, this is the only way to have an exciting relationship, when there are so many ways. And if two people are truly partners, are truly emotionally connected, for you to say, unless I can go hiking with my partner, this marriage is not significant and meaningful and giving me pleasure, I'd ask people to start looking at what are their values, because we all go through webs and flows with this. And, we like one thing and then we like to hike and then, Can you go swimming instead of hiking? And why can't you have that same passion if your partner can swim, but they can't hike? And do you have to always do everything side by side, or can you have more? You can go hike and run your 5K, 10K, half marathon. I'll be there cheering you on. And the next thing I will do something and you'll do that for me. I think we have to look at relationships not just as everyone has to do the same.
Right. And it is important to see, like you said, there can be a sense of missing what it used to be. There could be a sense of loss, but also trusting in a relationship that we are in this essentially a giant improv exercise with life. When we're in relationship,
it's like
we're being called to see what we can do with what we have. We know that humans ebb and flow and change over time. So when you put two humans into a relationship, that's a lot of flowing and changing. So it is about learning, sort of like learning the new dance step in life, figuring out, okay, we once used to do this dance. Now we're going to do that dance.
And both dances have meaning and both dances can bring pleasure.
Yeah. And often they're not what we planned for. That's part of what makes it this beautiful improv exercise. And I do think that it's in doing that improv together that we become closer as partners.
And for me, I think the excitement of a relationship is the unknown. The things that you can now experience that you never could experience before, and that the only thing that matters is that we have the experience together. And if you can really buy into that concept, any challenge that comes, it's really about the attitude.
It is. And I remember hearing someone who's both a couples therapist and in a long-term partnership who said, why would I need many partners when I have one partner and really within that person, I have 10 different people?
Yeah, we're all Sybil, aren't we? In a lot of ways we are. And one day I'm one way, one day I'm another way, and just go for the ride and enjoy the experience.
Yeah.
What would you say in your experience with couples that the biggest challenges people with chronic illness have where it creates misunderstanding about what this experience really is like for the person that has the illness?
Well, I think that even outside of relationship, just the concept of having an illness is, as an individual, I'm developing a relationship with myself over time. And when I have a chronic illness, there's some real serious team building going on within myself. And I'm figuring out my identity and what it means about me. I'm figuring out who I am, but I'm also figuring out who I'm not. And often chronic illness will show me that I thought I was something, and when I don't have that thing, I still exist. So I'm still me. So when I'm in the context of a relationship as a person with chronic illness, I might be feeling guilt as if I had brought this chronic illness into the relationship, because it's very easy to make that association. Like, I brought my disease into this relationship, but I don't believe that. I believe that the couple is dealing with this third entity, that the third entity is the disease. And what can happen is we confuse the disease and the person, and we think that they're the same thing. And then you get all these dynamics coming up around, I feel guilty because I'm sorry that I don't feel well. And it's okay to apologize, but I think there's a point where you can kind of turn to each other and say, oh man, we're both really bummed that I'm too tired to go to this party, versus, I'm such a downer. I'm not showing up the way that my partner needs me to show up. It's like, my body's not showing up the way that I need it to show up.
Right.
It's like, we're both dealing with this. So I think that's one of the big themes that comes up a lot, is this feeling of guilt. Like I recently posted on the podcast Instagram a question for the listeners, who generally, most of the listeners have some kind of health challenge. And I said, what are some of the trickiest parts about navigating a romantic relationship while living with health challenges? And I got a range of responses. Negotiating the need for downtime and space, sex, guilt, communication during a flare, meaning during a time when my symptoms are at a high, when maybe I have fewer emotional and mental resources and physical resources, not feeling guilty when my partner does the housework, fearing dating in general, because what if I, scare someone off and they think that I'm a broken person? So there's a lot that can come up.
I would think one of them is fear of being abandoned.
Yeah. And what's interesting is we know as therapists working with couples that fear of abandonment is not something that just comes up for people with health challenges. So
Right.
It's like if you put the health challenge in there, often it will activate all the emotional stuff that we've already been living with and bring it to the surface.
Right, which then means you end up having a better relationship because so many couples don't talk about those kinds of things. And when there's a chronic illness, as you're saying, you don't have the choice.
Right.
Because it's right out there.
And I do want to say, I so wholly agree with you. And at the same time, I want couples who are hearing this to know that it's totally normal to be willing to talk about it, to want to do the work and to not know how. And that's where I totally recommend getting an awesome therapist that you can trust. Where you can go in, I think weekly therapy is great. If you can go in on a weekly basis and just get on the same page and start to understand each other, even about the little things, the scary stuff isn't nearly as scary because you've got a place to come and talk about the realness of living with a health challenge or of all the other stuff. Because couples living with one or both partners with chronic illness have all the other life things to deal with too.
Right. And I think we have to keep in mind that as we all age, as medical science is doing some pretty cool things where we live longer, we may not all be dealing with chronic illness, but at some point in your relationship, you're dealing with illness. And if you could really have a relationship early on where you can basically begin to do that kind of work where you both, because I love your comment about that if you can really put the illness as an external force that impacts both people, not just one, and that it's up to the two of you to fight that sort of alien together, then you're a team, and it's a we. It's not either one of you with the problem. And as couples counselors, one of the things we work very hard with couples, whether they have this illness or not, is to get blame out of the focus. It's not about whose fault is it. It's about what are we going to do to make this the best relationship out there. That's all that really matters.
Right. I love that. What are we going to do to make sure that this is the best relationship and the best relationship for us? Right. And it is something that, when you do work on your relationship, it's work. It's like going to the gym. You're working out a muscle. It's not always easy, but then your muscle gets stronger. And so if you're doing this work earlier in the relationship because of a health challenge, you're strengthening your relationship.
Right. And it's always easier to lift up weights when there's two of you lifting it up as opposed to one trying to lift it up.
That is so true. And I'm sure you've probably seen this in the media, but there are beautiful examples of couples where one person or both have health challenges and they talk about what a tremendous impact their partners have on their lives.
Right.
And I think that there's something very special about those relationships. Usually it's the partner who's quote unquote well, who gets like a lot of the glitz and the excitement, like, oh, this person's such a good person. But I think that I think that it's equally exciting and important to say, you picked this person and you're letting them into your heart. You're open to receiving love. Sometimes it's easier to be the giver in some ways. And we need to acknowledge ourselves too for allowing people to show up for us. So I think both partners are so important in those relationships that doing it alone is very different than having a partner.
Right. And I think the other thing we have to talk about is the whole concept of being a caretaker and burnout. And that I think part of the biggest challenge when you talk about the guilt issues is really if tend to be someone that has to be physically helping my partner a lot because they can't walk or there's other challenges that they can't do, that it's okay it's okay to turn to them and say, I've had it up to here, I need a break.
Yes.
And so that conversation is the conversation that I don't think happens enough.
And it's the ability to say, I need a break, that allows doing it in the first place to be safe. So if I'm supporting someone and I know that I have an out if I need to take a break, that makes all the work I'm doing much more safe. I think it makes the person receiving the support trust that they're receiving support not from a place of resentment or someone who's overworked and not advocating for themselves. Like I always tell my friends, I want to know that you can say no to me before I'm really going to feel comfortable with your yes.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Then it's a real yes and a real no.
Yeah. And that's part of respect.
Right.
When is the last time you took a relationship checkup? Sure, we get our vehicles serviced, have maintenance done on our homes, and see our local doctor to make sure our bodies are in good working order. But sadly, we tend to neglect one of the most important things in our lives, the health of our relationship. You get mammograms, you get a prostate check, but do you check your relationship? Most of us don't. The relationship checkup and assessment will provide you with a comprehensive information about the level of satisfaction you have with your partner, how deep the emotional connection is, how strong your trust and commitment is, and whether or not you deal with conflict well. The best part is you don't have to do it alone. The couples expert will provide you with a 30-minute consultation to help you feel really strong and empowered to do all that you can because you take the ownership of your relationship by the two of you working together and taking the annual survey. For merely the cost of dinner and a movie, you can set yourself on the road to a fulfilling and fabulous relationship that will last a lifetime. Go to www.thecouplesexperts.com and sign up today to register for your relationship checkup. Now back to the episode.
So in terms of a couple and staying emotionally close with these chronic illnesses, what would be some of the suggestions you could give the listeners who are listening to this episode of how to make sure that your relationship is in a good place? Do you have any specific things that couples could look at and share, and how to really make sure that they're on the right place with the relationship?
Yeah. So one of the tools that I give all my couples when they begin with me is the book, Getting the Love You Want. And it's a book that talks about how relationship is a place of healing. And when we can acknowledge that it's very normal to struggle, that it's normal for us to have challenging dynamics that show up or repetitive arguments, so that we can start to understand that there are unconscious processes going on and that there are tools for getting more conscious about our behaviors in relationship. That book is amazing. So even if you just want a tool for your own home to begin trying out some of the exercises and looking at the theory, that's my number one suggestion.
Okay.
And then, of course, the Imago Relationship Weekend, which is also called Getting the Love You Want. So those are the main tools, outside of just how to talk to each other. They do outline some beautiful ways of being in relationship. And so what I generally recommend is using some of those tools that I'll just outline right now, which are to establish, when you're having a conversation about something difficult, especially, first, share an appreciation, acknowledge something that your partner's done over the past week that you really value, and start it off on a positive note. Let them know that they're appreciated, and then move into figuring out who's going to be the sender, who's going to be the receiver, and sharing from a place of I statements of, being a responsible sender. So the sender's being vulnerable and sharing what their life is like, what their world is like, and the receivers being generous and allowing themselves to really kind of unburden themselves of having to judge or agree or disagree, but really just being present to see the world for a few minutes through their partner's eyes. And then once that's done, to be able to summarize what your partner said, tell them why they make sense, and empathize and guess. I imagine you might be feeling alone or joyful or relieved. So when we start to talk in this way, It takes us away from being in decision-making mode and having to come up with all the answers at once and moving from problem to solution. And we stick in that middle space where it's less about the solution and it's more about the fact that we're actually talking about it together.
Those are great suggestions. And if we put the chronic illness in those dialogues, so what you're suggesting is that just use the chronic illness within that framework.
Yeah. And I think, and I have to say, I do think that this is the most important thing, is to just acknowledge that chronic illness is one of many struggles that couples deal with.
Well, Lauren, I want to thank you for coming on the show and just sharing of yourself and your time and giving some of the suggestions that you did. I really appreciate you doing that. Why don't you let people know how they can get in touch with you if they want to, and the best ways to reach out?
Absolutely, yeah. So my psychotherapy website is consciouspartnerships.com, and my podcast website is thisisnotwhatiordered.com.
And I'm going to have all of that, folks. For those listening in their car, they don't have to write it down because it will be on the show notes. So thank you again, Lauren, for joining me, and I wish you well, and hope all the listeners will check Lauren out, because she's definitely one of the people out there that cares about people who she works with. Take care now.
Thank you so much, Stuart. Take care.
All righty. Bye-bye now.
Thank you for listening. This episode has ended, but your journey continues. Head over to www.thecouplesexperts.com to access all the links and resources mentioned in this episode, as well as bonus content exclusive to podcast listeners. Enjoyed this episode? Why not hit subscribe now and never miss an episode?